Rick Ornelas wasn't always interested in helping others. Despite being pushed repeatedly in that direction by near death experiences, family tragedies, and even deaths. It wasn't until the ever worsening times of 2020 when he was laid off, quarantined, and desperate that he finally got his wake up call. You are not going to want to miss this story of Rick Ornelas and how he turned his life around, and so can you.
Have you ever felt like giving up, quitting, throwing in the towel? Welcome to Never Ever Give Up Hope featuring Carol Graham. She's an author, health coach, and motivational speaker. Backed into a corner multiple times in her life, Carol shares with you stories on how she overcame some of the toughest obstacles a person can go through in life, but refused to give up hope. Rather than admit defeat, an opportunity was presented, and it involves each and every one of you. Carol will feature spectacular guests who will share their messages of hope, encouragement, and their inspiration to prove why life's adversities only make you stronger. And now, welcoming the host of the show, here's Carol Graham.
Do you feel like you have greatness trapped inside of you? Rick Ornelas is an ultimate success coach who can help you unlock your amazing potential. And he is going to share today how each one of us have that potential inside of us. He is going to help us tap into that. Rick is the author of 12 Hours of Heaven, Lessons for a Better World. He is also the founder of I Spark Change. I can't wait to hear about this, Rick, because just listening to some of the other things that you have shared and reading what you have shared, this is a message for everybody. So he is the founder of I Spark Change, which is a community of those who, drum roll, seek to make the world a better place, one act at a time. I think this is something that we all want to be involved in. Thank you, Rick, for being on Never Ever Give Up Hope.
Hi, Carol. It's a pleasure to be on Never Ever Give Up Hope. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share my story and to be on your show.
Oh, absolutely. This is going to be exciting. So, the first thing we talk about on the show is also the point in our lives where we seem to have just be at the bottom. Many people in my audience are going to be able to relate with the heartache that you experienced, and even more so in our current COVID world. So, let's start in 2004. What happened with your sister?
I, like many others, have been touched by tragedies in my life that come when you absolutely do not expect them. And in 2004, where I have a young family, I'm happy. We had just bought a new house, and things going great. And extended family, everything seems fine. I have a sister, Linda, who was she was struggling with bipolar disorder, and she had been in and out of the hospital and had challenges for many years, but it seemed manageable. She got married. She had two uh, very beautiful infant children. I mean, they're just 11 months apart, my niece and nephew, so they were very young. And she seemed like she was okay. Um, and then one day, I remember I was out. I was a sales rep at the time, and I was out working with my boss. We get back to the car after we had been on a sales call, and I see my phone that I had like a dozen missed calls from my wife, and I, immediately call her back, wondering what's wrong, and she's, in tears, and she's very distraught, and she just keeps saying, you have to come home, you have to come home, and I was like, what's going on? What is going on? You have to tell me. She proceeds to tell me that my sister had taken her own life, and
Oh my
And
goodness.
I remember it so clear. I threw the phone down on the floor of the car, and my boss, who was my friend, he's like, what's going on? What happened? What happened? And I told him what had happened, and he was speechless. I mean, what do you say to someone in that situation? And I tried to gather myself, and I drove home. We weren't that far, so I drove him back to his car and drove home to see my wife. And it was just like I think I was in shock, for because that's, like I said, that's just something that you don't expect.
Of
It just comes
course,
out
of
of the blue.
course.
Yeah, and that was it was a very challenging time.
And how did you handle it?
I've always been so I'm the youngest of five, and I have four older sisters, Linda included, and I had always been the one that my family looked to for, not necessarily for answers, but looked to for strength, looked to be like a someone supportive and someone strong, when others were struggling. And that was the role that I kind of assumed from a very young age. And so I said, okay, well, this is a time to be strong. So my wife and I, we immediately packed up the kids, and we headed down. We were living in California at the time, and we had to drive down about 3 hours to where my brother-in-law lived. And we drove down to be with him and home with the kids and be with my family. And it was just, I remember being in his house, which was coincidentally on the same street that the house I grew up in, we all grew up in. So, very close, just all the memories. And I remember just, trying to be there, and we just were just all in such shock, but we just tried to support each other, as much as we could, and to be there, for my mom, especially, and for my other sisters, and for my brother-in-law, and for the little ones that, had no idea because they were just, they were just babies at the time. But just trying to be as supportive as possible, and put on that face aura of support for everyone, whether, even though I was pretty much dying inside, but you just try to be strong for everyone else.
One thing that you said was that life was going good, and then you got blindsided by this tragedy. And I think that is sadly a common scenario. And I can relate to that personally. I remember clearly saying to my husband one day, I don't think life could be any better. And 3 days later, the bottom fell out. When that happens, I think that having a good life has probably been a real perk, that you did have that security. And as you yourself had to become strong, not just for yourself, but for others in your family and be that pillar. And we have sometimes more strength in us than we imagine we have, correct?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, Carol. And that's something that has, the more I've realized that, the more it's manifested itself in my life. And, I believe those things happen for a reason. And that I do feel that all of us have that capability inside that, you know, we don't know, we never know until we're put in that situation, right? We never know how we're going to handle it. And then when it is in those times of adversity, that's where we truly grow stronger. And that's where we truly, um, become the best version of ourselves. It's not when it's easy, because that, it's like working out, right? If you lift a weight that doesn't weigh anything, then there's no strain, there's no growth for the muscle, right? And it's exactly the same way. When the easy times, we're getting very little benefit other than some enjoyment, I guess, in the moment. But long term, it's those other times where all that strength comes from, for sure.
Well, I certainly relate, and I'm sure many members of the audience do. Those of you who have read my own memoir know that was one tragedy after another, and I know that Rick is going to share that part of his story as well. And sometimes you feel like, how can I take one more? But then in hindsight, years later, and you look back and you think, look at all the people that I have been able to help and encourage, just share my story with, to give them something to look forward to, knowing that this is not the end of the road. This is just a bump in the road. And you hit the nail right on the head there when you said that you are better, a better person, a better friend, a better husband, a better father, a better everything as a result of what you had endured. But that's not the end of the story. Tell us, as you progress now to mid 2020, when the whole world came crashing down, what brought you to that point and what happened?
Well, last year, so in just over a year ago, about 13 months ago, when the world went into quarantine, right? Kind of the whole world is going into quarantine, and everything's shutting down. And where we live in Texas, we had to go into quarantine, and businesses are closing and everything. When all that happened, like a lot of people, and probably a lot of your listeners, I started to get fearful and anxious because of the uncertainty of it all.
Hmm.
And I think that was a big challenge, for me and others, is that, I'm someone that, prides myself on being, organized and having a sense of control, right, over my life. And then all of a sudden you have zero control, right? You're like, oh, that control is taken away
That's
from you.
right.
And now you have no control. And that was not a comfortable place for me, right? And I think it was an excellent lesson at the time for me, is to learn that we never really have control, right?
Hmm.
And as that all started happening, and I started just being very uncomfortable as the days progressed, and I found myself looking at the counters every day, and oh, it's the virus is getting worse, and all these things, and what's going to happen, and what's going to happen. Start thinking of all those what if scenarios. And again, that's not something that I typically do. I've learned over many years that it's just not a productive behavior. Those kind of what ifs. It's okay to prepare for things, but like kind of what if, and negative self-talk. And it became so uncomfortable that I realized I needed to do something. I decided to write. And so I wrote a blog that was entitled How to Use COVID as an Opportunity. And I had so many thoughts, actually, that I had to put it in two parts of a blog. My colleague who reviewed it, he said, you know what, there's too much good stuff here. You need to break it up into two parts. So I broke it up into this two-part blog. And the first part was about, using the time as an opportunity, right?
Right.
That the COVID wasn't, yes, it had its challenges, and yes, there was uncertainty and all that, but that in itself gave us a gift. It gave us a gift of time. It gave us a gift of being able to be present with our families, and being able to help others, and all these wonderful things. And that's what I wrote about. I wrote about just seizing the opportunity that we were all given. And as I wrote that, I I said, you know what? It reminded me. So for the past few years, and I can relate a story of where this came from. But for the past few years, I had been thinking about writing a book that had been in my head for 20 years, since I had been in a major car accident. And I decided, I'm like, now's the time. Now is the time. You can't put this off. You've been putting it off long enough, and you can't put that off. And so I decided to channel my energy into writing. And I finally started writing my book, 12 Hours of Heaven. And I just put all my attention into that, because as the days went by, and I wrote more and more, the world was getting worse. The world was getting even worse. I mean, we
Right.
had, the issues with, racism and the protests, and all sorts of tragedies. And I was like, oh, what is going on? Like, things are just getting worse and worse and worse. And what that empowered me more, because I was like, hey, I've been given this gift. I need to do something with it, and I need to help give others hope, and give them some inspiration. And that's what I felt I was being called to do. That's what I felt I was being told, inside my heart, and in my head, and, in my spirit, my soul, that I was being told, look, you have to continue on, writing, and you have to continue with this work, and just inspire others. And yeah, it was crazy.
What I loved what you said was seizing the opportunity that each one of us was given. And personally, with my husband and I and our business, that is exactly what we did. And I know as soon as you reach out and look outside, your own little world, you will find that. And that is exactly what you did and what we did, and so many did. Rather than look at what happened as tragedy, but turned it around to an opportunity. We're just going to take a quick break, and then we are going to talk about when you hit bottom, how this turned around, and we want to hear about your book. We'll be back in just 30 seconds.
Carol Graham would like to show you the path from misery to miraculous triumph in her fast-paced memoir, Battered Hope. She relates her determination to succeed as someone who experienced one horrendous nightmare after another. Gang raped and left for dead, loss of a child, husband falsely imprisoned, and cancer. Nothing could break her tenacity or faith. No matter what you face, heartache, loss, suffering, or injustice, Carol will illustrate how she became a victor the same way you can. The secret is to never, ever give up hope. Order your copy at Amazon or batteredhope.blogspot.com.
What we would like to do is to hear what else happened to bring you to this place before you turned your life around. There were other situations that happened that a lot of people would look at stumbling blocks rather than stepping stones. So I'd like you to share during this time when you felt you had hit bottom and some of the other things that brought you to this place where you turned your life around. Take us on that trip.
Yes, thank you for asking, Carol. So, as I was saying before the break, that I started to write, and I figured I needed to write to help myself, right, to help inspire and empower myself, and to do the same for others. As I reflected on, the story that had been in my head for 20 years, it took me back to the initial spark for that story, and you go back to 20 years ago, even before my sister had passed away, when I'm, living in that good time. Like I'd said, I had two daughters at the time. Now we have three, but two, and they were small. They were about 1 and 4, and we were happy young family. And one day we're driving back from a birthday party down in Los Angeles. It was about 2.5 hours away from where we lived, and we're coming back from a birthday party, and it starts to rain like it never rains in Southern
Hmm.
California. And it's the roads are super slick, and cars have pulled off to the side, and we contemplate just pulling over and waiting, but it doesn't look like it's letting up. And my wife doesn't want to be stuck in the when it starts getting dark, and it was getting late. And so we decided to just carry on slowly and cautiously. Well, unfortunately, the water had other plans for our journey, because I hit
Hmm.
a puddle, and we're driving in the slow lane, and I hit a puddle, and we start hydroplaning and spinning out of control to the left, and we spin across 4 lanes of the
Oh my
highway.
goodness.
And as we're heading towards the center divider, I'm trying to steer, and both my wife and I are screaming, and we just don't know what's going on. And I try to steer, and somehow we don't hit the center divider, and but we do continue to spin out of control, spinning, and we spin the opposite direction, and we spin back across the 4 lanes the other way. and
Goodness.
and we don't hit any other cars. Crazy, we don't hit any other cars. And we go off the freeway, up off the shoulder, up this slanted dirt embankment, and we hit a brick wall, a cinder block wall, at high velocity, and we flip over, and we land back on the wheels.
Oh, and you're still alive at this point.
And we're still alive at this point. And I immediately, I look at my wife and see if she's okay, and look at my daughters who were strapped into their car seats, and they had been asleep, and they were awake, and they were crying, but they seem okay. And the windshield is completely shattered. The right side windows are shattered, and the car's filled with glass and dirt, and it's still raining, and the roof is completely smashed down, down to our
Hmm.
heads. But we all seem fine. So we managed to get the kids, and we crawl out of my side, and there's a older couple that had pulled over, and they were sitting there on the side of the road, and they put the lady has a blanket, and she wraps it around my wife, who's sitting on the side of the road just crying and holding my daughters as tight as she can. And I'm talking to the gentleman, and he says to me, he says, I can't believe that you all got out of the car. I can't
Hmm.
believe that you're alive and that you're not dead. And he says, that's the most incredible thing I've ever seen in my life, you know. And like I said, this was an older gentleman. And it didn't really hit me right away, because I thought, I was like, wow, you know, it was so fast, right? And I didn't think, like, you know, how lucky we were, right? And then so we get taken in an ambulance, and they say the kids are fine, and the car gets towed off. Where it really hit me was the next day. I get a ride down to the well, two things. First, two things really hit me when my sister and brother-in-law came to pick us up, to take us home. My young daughter Kinsey, who, like I said, was one at the time, when we tried to put her in the car seat, she started screaming and did not want to get back in the car. And that she loved, you know, she would fall asleep every time she sat in her car seat. She loved it, and she was so scared to get.
Hmm.
She just kept saying
Hmm.
no and was so scared. And I was like, oh my gosh, look at the impact it had on her, even though she's, you know, just little bitty, and she was asleep. You know how frightened she was. And then so I realized how powerful of an event it was, right? How
Right,
traumatic of an event
right.
it was. And then the second thing that made me realize was when I went to the tow yard where they had towed my car, and it's sitting on a flatbed in front of the office, and it's all demolished and sitting there. And I go inside to the office, and I say to the gentleman there, I said, yeah, I'd like to get my things. You know, can I get them out of the black Grand Prix that's on the flatbed? And he says, well, whose car is that? And I said, well, it's my car. And he said, no, that's not your car. And I said, well, yeah, it's my car. And he said, no, no, I always know, you know, what happened to the people by what the car looks like, and whoever was driving that is either dead or in the hospital. And
Oh
and
no.
and
Wow.
and I was like, you know, I had to show him my ID and prove that it was my car and everything, and get our stuff. And I, you know, at first, like, I didn't think about those things until afterward. And as I reflected, I thought about it, and I was like, you know, this is really a really a quite a blessing. Like, this is, you know, a miracle in a sense that
Of
we're
course.
not dead, right? That my family was protected, and my mom kept telling me, you know, your guardian angel protected you, your guardian angel protected you, and she gave me a little angel pin to put in my
Ah.
car moving forward. And one day I'm sitting there staring up at that little angel pin on the visor, and instantly, the story, which would become my book, hit me like a movie, and where it was in my head,
Wow.
like I had just watched the movie, like it was in my head, clear as day, like I had just viewed the whole movie. And the story is, which I, you know, didn't write for 20 years because of, you know, I kept going back to that place of comfortability that so many of us go to, where you go back and you're like, oh, things are good again. So I guess I can just go along with my life
Hmm.
and everything's okay. And then bam, 2004, right? And then you go along, and then, you know, you know, bam, some other challenge, you know, hits you. And there's plenty, you know, we'd be here all day if I tell you about all of them, but like everyone, like me, and anyone else that's listening, we all have those things that just, they come along, right? And we get in that comfortable place. And so for 20 years, I got in that comfortable place until I was forced, like I said, with COVID. And so that brings us back to where I start writing. And in the writing, the story is about an angel that is sent down from heaven, and he gets trapped in an elevator with 10 individuals that are all totally different individuals. And they get trapped in this big elevator, and they're trapped overnight for 12 hours. And during those 12 hours, he's able to help them all through the biggest challenges that they're facing in their life. And he teaches them some lessons, and he learns some things himself. And those lessons for a better world, as I call them, those were things that I've learned over, you know, the past 20 years and
Oh my
beyond.
goodness. That's
Um,
awesome.
they're Yeah, and thank you. And they're not. I'll just sum it up by saying these are all things that aren't unique to me. They're lessons that touch
Yes.
anyone. That
Yes.
touch anyone, like practicing gratitude, or being present with your family, or loving or giving. I mean, these are all things that anyone can do, and anyone can has inside of them. You just have to get out of that comfortable place and share it with others.
What a wonderful challenge. Now, when people read the book, is it written like a story, or is it like each chapter is a separate thing that we should practice?
That's an excellent question, and others have asked the same thing. It's written, it's one whole story, so it's one whole story, with the angel and his, he's up in heaven and he gets sent down, and he's on his own journey of, discovering himself, and then, there's different uh, chapters attached to different lessons that are attached to different characters within the elevator, but it's all one complete story. So it's not a series of short stories, it's one whole complete story. And there's actually a follow-up book that I just started that will continue the story.
Now, did this pole vault you then to starting iSpark Change? And tell us about that.
Yes, that is exactly what happened, Carol. As I if I take us back to the time where I started writing, in last April, and I started going through it very methodically, which is how I do a lot of things. I said, okay, well, I'm going to write. You read online and it says you should write every day, and you should write, 500 to 1,000 words a day, and be consistent. And you're an author, so you can appreciate that. And and I said, okay, I'm just going to go about it, very, very methodical, right? Well, I think God had other plans for me, because as I got into that, and about the time June hit, and I was thinking about my dad had passed away in 2019, and one of those tragedies of life. My father passed
Right.
away at the age of 96, who was, my
Wow.
we were very close. I was only son, and we were always had a great relationship, and I had been blessed with so many years with him, after he had different health issues even back in his 70s, and he was always a much older father, and I felt so fortunate. I just kind of figured, oh, he's gonna be here till 100,
That's
and
right.
everything, and then he had a fall, and then that ended up speeding things up, and he passed away, and at the end of July, and as we started getting closer to that, I started getting more emotional and more spiritually connected as I'm writing about this angel and spiritual content, and
Hmm.
and I was praying a lot more, and I started getting really, really connected. And what happened is I went through this spiritual awakening period where I felt like I was being divinely inspired, that I felt that the story was just being given to me, and I was just typing, to where my writing, I started writing over 2,000 words in a couple hours and at a time, and it just flourished. And I didn't really have to think about the story, or everything just flowed right out. And and during that time, which lasted from about June, about my birthday, till about the anniversary of my father's death, the end of July, of about 4 or 5 weeks, it was such a uh, enlightened and emotional time for me, that I had a flood of ideas in that time, and
Hmm.
creativity was just flowing. And during that time, I was having dreams and visions, and and felt a deeper calling to do more, to not just write the book, but to do
Hmm.
more, which I had alluded to earlier. And that's when the idea for iSpark Change came. The idea for iSpark Change came during that time where I felt I was being told to release the book, give people some hope, but then take it far beyond that, and start working on a greater calling and a greater cause, to connect other individuals that want to spread positivity and love in the world, and want to spark change, and show them that they can, and show them, empower them, show them that they're not alone in a time of when we're all isolated, right? In a time when everybody's isolated, show us that we're not alone.
So how can
And
people get connected with you this way? And what challenge can we give the audience to get connected?
yeah, that's a great question. Is if they go to iSpark Change, this the letter I, sparkchange.com. then there they can sign up and join iSpark Change. And all that it takes to join iSpark Change is just making a commitment saying that you want to positively impact the world. That's it.
That's
I mean,
awesome.
there's nothing else. It doesn't take, there's no cost, there's no anything. They can go to the Facebook group. It's, you know, Facebook, Instagram, all of those. It's the same thing, iSpark Change, but they can find the Facebook group and join there, and they'll see, affirmations and positivity and motivation and everything on a daily basis on social media. Um, but what I would what I would challenge them, since you asked what I would challenge them, is that to every day to just do one thing that will have um, a positive impact. And I won't even say the world, because for a lot of people, they think that's too big, right? And they think, oh, what am I going to do? I'm one person.
Hmm.
How can I
Hmm.
impact the world? But what I will challenge everybody is that just by one positive action, as simple as a smile at someone, a stranger, and I've said this a lot, that's the simplest thing I can think of that anybody has the capability to do, right? It doesn't cost anything. It doesn't take any time, any effort. You actually use less muscles in your face than frowning. So you you smile,
Hmm.
and and that has a ripple effect that, that the whole pay it forward kind of ripple effect that impacts the world, whether you see it or not. It does have a ripple effect, and that's the challenge I would make. And the last thing I'll say is that because I know people want to think of different ways. If they do sign up and join iSpark Change, they'll get a free download of 25 creative ways to spread positive change in the
Oh,
world. And these
that's
are,
fantastic.
yeah, and these are things anybody can do. These are things that anybody can do today. Like they don't, it doesn't take any preparation or time or money or anything that anyone can do.
I really appreciate that. I was hoping that that was going to be something that you would have available. It's just kind of like a kickstart, like a boost, for somebody to, and it's just like buying a cup of coffee for somebody or any number of things, the stranger, being kind, like you said, smiling. You don't have to walk down the street very far to see the fear in people's faces and to see the anguish and to see, the turmoil within themselves, not knowing what's going to happen next in this crazy world. So when you share that and we can spread that good news, there's no end, and I'm sure that you will agree. There is no end. It's ongoing. Anything that
Yeah,
you would like
absolutely.
to share in like a summary or whatever?
Yeah, first off, I just want to say thank you. Thank you very much, Carol. This has been, a phenomenal experience just chatting with you. And, it's truly a blessing. So thank you for that, and this opportunity. And second, I would say, I would just continue what I was saying. I would just empower anyone that's listening, anyone that comes across this episode, or that comes across iSpark Change, that you can make the world a better place. And it it starts with each one of us, and each one of us just doing those tiny, tiny little actions. They do have a ripple effect. They do have a snowball effect that will change the world. I'm committed to doing this, working on this for the rest of my life. So hopefully there'll be a lot of others that will do the same. And the more each of us can do those tiny little actions, those do have that big compound effect that, long term, they will make a difference. So, please don't be afraid to seek out some change and help others.
I really appreciate that. As you were talking, I was thinking that I'm going to make this a challenge when we share your story here on the website to really encourage people to possibly not only do those things, but to also let us know what they did, and let this become like a momentum that is going to build, which I know is that's where your heart's desire is. So we need to buy your book, get inspired there, and then hook up with you at iSpark Change, and let's turn some of these negativities around. Thank you so much, Rick, for sharing what you did today. I really appreciate everything that you said. Everything that you've gone through has made you a better, stronger person. and you are feeling, I'm sure, more fulfilled than you ever expected just because of where you are now. And that's the purpose. When we help others, when we share our stories, we are the ones that end up getting getting blessed and having the good end of the stick, so to speak, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That you hit the nail on the head with that one. I'm doing all this to help others, and I'm probably the one getting the most benefit. But
Exactly.
I never look at it that way, because I feel if I
Of
just
course not,
keep
but
doing
that's what
others,
happens.
they'll help. Yeah, yeah, it's awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thank you again, Rick, for being on Never Ever Give Up Hope. And we are looking for some exciting things to happen as a result of this podcast today. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Never Ever Give Up Hope, featuring Carol Graham. Did you know that most people succeed because they are determined to? Quitting was never an option. Carol loves your comments and will respond to each one. So please subscribe and review this podcast. A rating of 5 stars would be outstanding and appreciated. Remember, if you are still here, there is always hope.